"You're not worth the spoons," Peggy said when she finally called me back. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Her voice came through the phone, thin and indifferent, as if she were discussing the weather. A small click echoed in my ear as she shifted the phone, and something inside me twisted sharply, the way metal bends before it snaps. I stood behind the counter, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the shop still cold from the 3 unopened hours. The scent of stale eucalyptus vape lingered in the air, mixed with the faint metallic chill that clings to a space left dark too long. My hands were trembling, though I kept them out of sight. Years of running this place taught me to hide the shake before anyone could use it against me. She didn't apologize, not once. She didn't ask if the store had opened, if customers had been waiting outside, if the other staff had been stranded in the parking lot. Her voice floated through the line with a strange calm, a tone that made me feel like I was being scolded for expecting too much. I swallowed carefully, afraid my voice would crack. "Peggy," I said, and even hearing her name out loud felt like pressing on a bruise. "You were supposed to open this morning." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture, thick, dismissive, and almost smug. I could hear her breathing softly on the other end. A car passed outside the shop, its headlights flashing through the blinds in a brief, cold stripe across the floor. Finally, she sighed, long and deliberate. "I told you," she said. "I needed a mental health day." My jaw tightened. My chest tightened with it. For a second, I imagined myself from the outside, a 56-year-old woman standing in a store she'd built from nothing, holding a phone to her ear like a scolded child. The pettiness of the thought stung, and I forced it back down. I'd trained myself to swallow worse. "You could have called," I whispered. The words came out thin. "Just 2 minutes. Peggy, people were waiting outside. Employees were locked out." I heard the faint rustle of fabric, maybe her adjusting her collar or moving the phone. Then she said it again, slower this time, as if speaking to someone who refused to understand basic instructions. "I didn't have the spoons." My throat tightened. A metallic taste rose beneath my tongue. The phrase meant nothing to me, but the tone, God, the tone, carried enough contempt to make meaning irrelevant. It wasn't what she said. It was how clearly she believed that saying it absolved her of everything. A soft hum from the mini fridge filled the room. Behind the counter, one of the cardboard boxes was still half open from the order we'd received yesterday. The corner sagged inward, a small rip in the seam I hadn't noticed before. Even that felt like a tiny accusation. "When you took the manager position," I said, forcing myself to breathe evenly, "you agreed to open the shop. You agreed to communicate. You agreed you'd be dependable." She let out a short laugh, not sharp, not loud, just a tiny puff of air full of disbelief. "I didn't agree to sacrifice my mental health for a vape store." I closed my eyes for half a second, long enough for a pressure to rise behind them. I didn't let the tears fall. Not now, not over this, not here. The truth was simple, and it pressed down on my shoulders like a slow, crushing weight. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't an emergency. It was her showing me, clearly, cleanly, unapologetically, who she was willing to be now that she had a title. I thought about the customers knocking on the door earlier, the 2 teenage boys peering through the glass, the older man who had tapped so gently as if hoping someone might magically appear. I thought of my other employees standing outside with their jackets pulled tight, waiting for a key that never arrived. "You left everyone hanging," I said softly. "Maybe you should hire more staff if the place falls apart without me," she replied. Something inside me shifted, not a snap, not yet, more like a slow rearranging, the way a door quietly closes when the wind changes direction. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, humming louder, casting a pointed white glare across the register. It was the kind of cold light that exposes fingerprints and dust, the kind that offers no kindness. Her breath came through the speaker again, steady, unburdened, entirely sure she had said nothing wrong. I realized then that this conversation was no longer about today. It was about every tomorrow that would look exactly like this one. "I'll need you to come in," I told her. "For what?" "To talk." Another pause, a sharper one. "I'm not coming in," she said. "Not if you're going to punish me for taking care of myself." A tremor moved through my hand, small but unmistakable. I curled my fingers into my palm until the nails pressed crescent shapes into the skin. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not until the shaking eased. Because the truth was rising, slow and certain, like something long buried forcing its way back to the surface. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. This was a warning. And if I ignored it, I knew exactly how far it would go. Behind me, the back door creaked faintly as a gust of cold air slipped under the frame, carrying a thin curl of winter with it. The lights flickered again, and for a moment the whole shop seemed to tilt into a darker shade of itself. I realized, with a clarity that tightened every muscle in my body, that the decision I made next would change everything: my store, my staff, my future. Peggy was still waiting on the line when I lifted my head, and then something happened that made my breath snag sharply in my chest. The front door slowly opened, and one of my employees stepped inside with an expression that told me news was coming. News I wasn't ready to hear. Jasmine stepped in fully then, closing the door behind her as if she were afraid the cold outside might hear what she was about to say before I did. "Hey," she murmured, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, and she clutched her phone in one hand like a lifeline. The line outside was bad. People were knocking for a while. I nodded, my fingers still curled around the phone. Peggy hadn't hung up. I could see the call timer blinking on the screen, her silence lingering like a third person between us. "I opened as soon as I got here," I said quietly. "What time did you arrive?" 10. She glanced toward the front windows, where the thin winter light fell in pale streaks across the floor. "Carson got here at 9:30. We both thought maybe you'd overslept or something." Over the speaker, Peggy exhaled sharply. "Wow," she said. "So everyone's just reporting in to you now." The way she said everyone made my stomach twist, as if they were all on one side and I was firmly on the other. "I am the owner," I replied, more firmly than I felt. "You were the manager on duty. The store didn't open." Jasmine shifted her weight. "The customers were mad," she said. "Someone filmed a TikTok or something. And, She hesitated. "There are some comments on the Facebook page." A pulse of heat went through my chest. "How many?" "Last I saw, over 20. She lifted her phone slightly as if offering to show me, then thought better of it and lowered it again. "Some of them tagged you by name. The regulars are confused. They're asking what's going on with management." On the line, Peggy laughed softly. "Maybe this is a sign you should invest in more mental health training and less controlling behavior." I stared at the phone, at her name glowing on that small rectangle of light. For 2 years, that name had meant reliability, extra shifts, someone I trusted to close out the drawer without double-checking. Now, it sounded like a stranger was speaking through it. "I'm going to call you back," I said. "I'm not sure I'll answer," she replied and hung up first. The click of the disconnection felt louder than it should have, as if the sound bounced off every glass bottle lining the shelves. Jasmine's eyes flicked to mine. She'd heard enough of Peggy's tone to understand more than I wanted any of them to know. "Do you want me to jump on register?" she asked. "The guys are handling the floor, but—" "Yes," I said, pulling myself upright, rolling my shoulders back until the stiffness in them settled into something close to steel. "I'll be in the back for a few minutes." As she moved toward the front, the chime above the door rang again. A gust of cold air slipped in with a customer, carrying the faint smell of cigarette smoke and winter exhaust. I listened to Jasmine greet them, her voice bright but a little too high, the way people sound when they know something is wrong but don't yet know how wrong. In the office, the air was warmer and stale. The small desk felt cluttered. Invoices, a chipped mug with yesterday's coffee ring dried at the bottom. The cheap framed certificate from the city that had once felt like an accomplishment. I sat down slowly and opened the Facebook page on the old desktop computer. The notifications stacked up in red at the top of the screen. 22 messages, comments under our last post. Drove 30 minutes and the place was dark. Are y'all still in business? Unprofessional. One woman had posted a photo of the locked door with the caption, "Support small business," they said. My chest tightened. I rubbed a thumb over the edge of the mouse to keep it from slipping. Then I saw Peggy's name. She hadn't posted on our official page. She'd posted on her own, and someone had tagged the shop beneath it. The preview of her words appeared in a small gray box. Imagine being punished for taking a mental health day because your boss only cares about profit. I didn't click it. I didn't have to. I could already feel the weight of those words gathering, like storm clouds collecting above a building that wasn't built for that kind of weather. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes and let the sting behind them rise, then forced it back down. I had cried in more bathrooms than I could count. I refused to add my own office to that list. There was a knock on the open door frame. Carson leaned in, one hand on the knob, his hair still wet from the rain. He'd been with me almost as long as Peggy had, reliable, steady, never late. His expression was careful, respectful, the way you look at someone standing next to broken glass. "Hey, he said quietly, "do you want me to tell customers we had technical issues this morning? Or just say we opened late?" The kindness in the question nearly undid me. It was small, but it was kindness. "Just tell them we opened late," I said. "No excuses." He nodded once. "For what it's worth," he added, keeping his voice low, "this isn't on you." She knew the schedule. The words landed gently, like someone laying a coat over my shoulders, thin but still warmer than the air around me. "Thank you," I said. He hesitated as if he wanted to say more, then stepped back, letting the sound of the register and the low murmur of customers seep in from the front. I picked up my phone and stared at Peggy's name in my recent calls. I didn't text. I didn't write a long explanation. I called. She answered on the third ring with a sharp inhale. "So," she said, "are you done being mad?" I let the question hang. The old me might have rushed to explain, soften, reassure. The one standing in a dark store at opening time, answering apologetic messages from regulars, might have begged her to understand. "You weren't here," I said instead. "People were locked out. We lost sales. We lost trust." "I was taking care of myself," she insisted. "Do you want a manager who burns out? Is that what you're saying? Because that's what I hear." I could hear faint sounds behind her voice, music, maybe a show playing in the background. She didn't sound sick. She didn't sound fragile. She sounded annoyed. "You didn't call," I said. "I told you," she snapped. "I didn't have the spoons. You keep acting like that's not a real thing. It is. When I wake up with no spoons, I can't do anything. Not calling, not texting, nothing. It's ableist to expect me to function the same every day." The word hung in the air between us. Ableist. I felt it like a slap. Not because it fit, but because it didn't. And somehow it still left a mark. "I have never punished you for taking time off," I said carefully. "You've called in before. I covered. We worked around it. But you cannot just disappear when you're the one with the keys." "You're policing my mental health," she shot back. "You're acting like my brain chemistry is a choice, like I woke up thinking, how can I screw over the shop today? I didn't choose this. I didn't choose to run out of spoons." The fluorescent light above my head flickered again, painting the office in brief, stuttering bursts of cold white. I stared at the stain on the ceiling tile near the vent, a yellowish bloom that spread out in uneven edges, like something that had been ignored too long. "Peggy," I said, "I'm not questioning your mental health. I'm questioning your reliability as a manager." Silence. This time, it wasn't indifferent. It was sharp, brittle, like glass, right before it breaks. "So what?" she finally said, voice lower now, tighter. "You're saying I can't be a manager because I'm mentally ill? Do you hear how that sounds?" My heart thudded against my ribs. I chose my next words slowly. "I'm saying," I replied, "that as a manager you have to communicate. You didn't. And this isn't the first time you've ignored messages when things got hard." Another pause. I heard her inhale, shaky this time, then steady. Her next words came out cool. "You might want to be careful," she said. "This all sounds really discriminatory. If you demote me or fire me because I took a mental health day, that's not going to look good. People talk. Screenshots exist." For an instant, my hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. There it was. Not a conversation, a threat. I felt a small, quiet anger settle where my hurt had been. It didn't roar. It didn't shout. It just anchored itself and refused to move. "I am not punishing you for taking a mental health day," I said. "I am responding to the fact that you abandoned your responsibilities without a word and left everyone else to deal with the fallout." She exhaled again, this time with a short, humorless laugh. "Same difference," she muttered. "You're still trying to take away what I earned." The office suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. The hum of the old computer, the faint distant chime of the door, the murmur of voices from the front, it all narrowed into a single point. I straightened in my chair. "You have two options," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "You can step back into your old position with your previous pay, or I can let you go." On the other end of the line, there was a sudden rustle, and then a small, unmistakable beep, as if something had just been turned on before she answered in a voice that had changed completely. "Could you repeat that?" she said slowly, "right from the beginning?" When I heard her say those words, careful, deliberate, almost rehearsed, I felt something inside me slide into place with a quiet, painful certainty. The tone was wrong, too measured, too smooth. The kind of tone people use when they've decided they're no longer speaking to you, but to whatever version of you they intend to present to the world. But this part of the story, this suspended moment of threat, was not where the truth of my life began. Far from it. Long before this shop, before the fluorescent lights and the endless balancing of schedules and orders and staff dynamics, there was a different life, a heavier one, a quieter one, a life shaped by scarcity, by responsibility, by years of building something out of nothing with hands that had been taught early how to work even when they were shaking. And before I could answer Peggy's chilling request, my mind, almost against my will, dragged me backward. Not because I wanted comfort, but because this moment, this power struggle, this pressure at my throat, it had roots so deep inside me that ignoring them would be like ignoring the sound of my own breath. I took a slow inhale and let memory pull me under. I grew up in a house where mornings smelled like burnt toast and motor oil. My father always left early, his uniform damp with the scent of the garage, his shoulders already hunched from the day that hadn't even begun yet. My mother worked nights at the textile mill, and the sound of the sewing machine still echoes sometimes in my dreams. A steady, relentless clatter that never really stops, no matter how far from childhood I travel. We didn't have much money. We didn't have much softness either. Everything in that house was built from endurance. There was no room for collapse, no room for disappearing without warning. If my mother didn't show up for her shift, she didn't get paid. If my father overslept, the family didn't eat for 2 days. Mental health wasn't a concept we had the luxury to name. You worked because life didn't care whether you had the spoons, the strength, or the soul left to do it. I was the oldest of 5. Caretaking wasn't something I chose. It was the air I breathed. I changed diapers before I was tall enough to reach the kitchen sink. I made lunches from scraped-together leftovers. I learned how to stretch $1 in ways no child should ever have to understand. By 12, I knew how to mend clothes, how to soothe a fever, how to hide my shaking hands when the bills came in pink envelopes with red letters across the top. There was one object from my childhood that stayed with me longer than anything else. A small, square piece of fabric torn from one of my mother's old sewing projects. She used it to teach me how to stitch when I was 8. The stitches were crooked and clumsy, tiny knots bunching the fabric in ways that made her laugh softly, even on the days when she couldn't smile about anything else. She kept that piece of fabric pinned above her work table, a reminder, she said, that imperfection didn't mean failure, only effort. Years later, when the mill closed and she lost her job, she took it down and tucked it into a drawer. She said the fabric didn't feel like hope anymore. It felt like a broken promise. I didn't see it again for decades, but the memory of it, its faded blue color, the uneven line of thread, the rough cotton texture, became a quiet echo inside me, a reminder that effort mattered, that showing up mattered. That you didn't abandon what you were responsible for, even when you were tired, even when life felt too heavy. Maybe that's why I opened the shop. Not because vape products were my dream, not because owning a business felt glamorous, but because after my divorce, after 30 years with a man who slowly drained the light out of me, one quiet criticism at a time, I needed something that was mine, something I could build stitch by stitch, the way my mother once taught me, something imperfect but alive. That first year was brutal. I worked open to close, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when I couldn't afford to let it shut for a single day. My hands were swollen from unpacking boxes. My feet ached so badly at night that I would run warm water in the tub and sit on the closed toilet lid, letting the steam rise while I tried not to cry. I sold old jewelry just to buy inventory. I cut coupons to put gas in my car. I slept at the shop twice during storms because I was afraid the roof would leak and ruin everything I owned. But I kept showing up, even when it hurt, even when I was tired, even when life felt like a too small coat I couldn't stop wearing. And people noticed. Customers came back. They remembered my name. They brought friends. They asked about my life in ways that made me feel seen after years of feeling like fading wallpaper in my own marriage. Some days, the sunlight through the front window felt like a blessing. Other days, it felt like a weight. But it was my weight, my struggle, my name on the lease, my survival. When I hired Peggy, she was young and raw, but determined. I saw a little of myself in her, someone trying to stand upright in a world that demanded more than it gave. She worked hard, she learned quickly, she tried, and for 2 years, she never once let me down. I remember the day I promoted her. Her face broke into this startled, bright smile, the kind that made her look younger than her age. She hugged me before asking permission, which I didn't mind, and she said, "I won't make you regret this." There was sincerity in her eyes, a steady flame. People change, though. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. A few months after the promotion, I noticed small things. She arrived right on time instead of early. She didn't volunteer for extra tasks anymore. She started deflecting blame when something small went wrong. And then there was the tone, subtle at first, then sharper. A tone that suggested responsibility was something negotiable rather than earned. Still, I wanted to believe in her. Maybe because believing in her meant believing that all the years I had spent climbing uphill had led to something real, something stable, something I could trust. But trust, I've learned, is a fragile fabric. One pulled thread, and the whole thing begins to unravel. It struck me, sitting in that office with the hum of the old computer and the faint smell of cardboard and cleaning wipes, just how much of my life had been spent trying to hold things together with my bare hands, trying to keep promises I didn't make, trying to be strong enough so that others could afford not to be. I exhaled slowly. The fabric scrap from my mother's work table, its memory rose again, not as a comfort but as a reminder. A stitch held only if both ends of the thread were anchored. If one end slipped, even the tightest seam gave way. Peggy had slipped free of her end, and part of me, some tender, stubborn part, still wondered if maybe I was expecting too much, if maybe I was becoming the rigid, unyielding adult my younger self once feared, if maybe the world had changed and I hadn't changed with it. But then I pictured the customers outside, the locked door, the disappointed faces, my staff standing in the cold, the TikTok video, the comments, the threat she had just implied, the way she had asked me to repeat myself, as if preparing evidence rather than reconciliation. No, I wasn't expecting too much. I was expecting what I had been forced to give my entire life: dependability, presence, a simple call. The soft ache behind my ribs deepened as I thought of my mother. The long nights she worked without complaint, the way she used to sit with me in the half-dark kitchen, guiding my small fingers through the needle's eye, teaching me that careful effort mattered more than perfection, that the things you held together with your hands meant something, that showing up was its own kind of love. I missed her then. Not with sharp grief, but with something quieter, an ache threaded through with memory. She would have understood the heaviness of this moment. She would have known exactly what it meant for someone to pull away from their duties and then call you cruel for expecting them to return. Responsibility had been her religion. She honored it even when it broke her. Maybe that was why this cut so deeply. Maybe Peggy's betrayal wasn't just about a late opening or a missed call. Maybe it brushed against something older inside me, something shaped by childhood scarcity, adult sacrifice, and a lifetime of being strong because no one else could afford the luxury. I opened my eyes again, slowly. The office light buzzed once, then steadied. Peggy was still on the line, waiting for me to repeat the words that could be twisted, reshaped, turned into a weapon. And something told me, something quiet but unmistakable, that the challenges ahead would demand more from me than any childhood hardship or divorce or first-year business struggle ever had. Because this wasn't just about work. It was about who I had always been and who I would have to become next. As I lifted the phone back to my ear, I felt Jasmine's shadow appear faintly in the doorway behind me, her silhouette stiffening as if she sensed something in my posture, some shift she couldn't yet name. I didn't turn. Not yet. Because Peggy's next breath on the line told me she wasn't done, not even close. Peggy stayed silent on the line for several long seconds, long enough that I could hear the faint tremor of my own breath against the receiver. That silence didn't feel empty. It was pointed, deliberate, an unspoken threat pressing against the inside of my chest. I didn't repeat anything, not yet. The words I eventually spoke would matter, but what mattered more in that moment was the truth settling uncomfortably beneath my ribs. Whatever this had become, it was no longer just a conversation. It was the beginning of something heavier, something that would take more from me before it gave anything back. I placed the phone gently on the desk without ending the call and stood. My knees ached the way they always did after I'd been sitting too long, a small reminder of age and effort and years spent working on floors that weren't built for comfort. The faint hum of the lights vibrated through the room, flickering once before steadying. Outside the office, the shop was busy now, voices rising and falling at the counter, the dull thud of a display drawer closing, the muted shuffle of shoes against the cheap laminate floor. Life continuing, whether I was ready or not. I forced myself to walk toward the door. As I stepped out, Jasmine glanced over from the counter. She smiled, tight, unsure. But she smiled. Customers were lined up, too deep, and Carson was rewriting a pricing board with unnaturally neat letters. Normalcy disguised the tension underneath, but it didn't erase it. I walked past them quietly, moving toward the back shelves to straighten inventory that didn't need straightening. I needed to move. I needed something to anchor me before the weight of this morning dragged me under. My fingers brushed a row of glass bottles, each one a different color beneath the buzzing white light. The glass was cool, almost cold, like touching the surface of something buried too deep. I kept my gaze low. Then I heard it. A low whisper. Not quite soft, not quite hidden. The kind of whisper people use when they think the person they're speaking about can't hear them and almost hope they can. "She's losing it," someone muttered from the aisle behind me. The words hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. I froze, one hand still resting on a bottle. Another voice followed, sharper. "Well, she pushed Peggy too hard. Everyone knows that. She expects too much." My throat tightened. I felt heat rise up the back of my neck, every muscle in my shoulders going rigid. It was instinct. Freeze first, breathe later. I stood absolutely still, as if movement might make the moment worse. A silence stretched around me, thin, fragile, suffocating. Carson's voice broke through suddenly, but with a coldness I'd never heard from him before. If she hadn't had a mental health crisis, none of this would have happened. A soft scoff followed. "Yeah, and whose fault is that?" My heart dropped. They thought it was mine. I leaned forward, resting a hand on the shelf to steady myself. The bottles rattled faintly against one another. I breathed in slowly, but it felt like I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. The weight in my chest deepened, pressing down until I could barely lift my head. The whispers continued, growing bolder now. She could have just said yes. Why make it a thing? She's old school, doesn't get it. She should have checked if Peggy was okay instead of lecturing her. Dead manager walking. Laughter, low but unmistakable. A crack ran through something inside me. Not loud, not breaking. More like the first hairline split in a dam, a fracture that promised the pressure behind it had been building for far too long. I straightened slowly and stepped away from the shelf, willing my face into stillness. Calmness had become a mask I wore so easily over the years, it almost felt natural. Almost. The whispers cut off abruptly when I came into view. No one looked at me directly. That was its own kind of cruelty, sharp, silent, intentional. They pretended to be busy with displays and price tags, but the air between us felt heavy with unsaid judgment. Their avoidance was worse than confrontation. A simple sentence could be argued with, explained, softened. But silence carved into a wall, left no place for me to stand. I walked to the back room, closing the door quietly behind me. The room was dimmer than before. One of the overhead lights flickered weakly, creating a stuttering shadow across the far wall. The air felt tighter, thicker, as though every exhale took up too much space. I sat at the old metal table, the edge digging lightly into the soft skin beneath my arms. I kept my hands folded in my lap so I wouldn't see the faint tremor starting again. How quickly respect could shift, how quickly loyalty could evaporate, how quickly years of sacrifice could be overshadowed by one morning's mistake that wasn't even mine. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple. The pressure helped steady my breath. But then something happened that scraped raw the edges of my composure. My phone buzzed. A notification popped up on the screen before I even picked it up. Peggy added a story. My stomach twisted. I opened it. A blurry image of her wrapped in a blanket, a mug in her hand. The caption read, "Some bosses don't understand that mental health isn't optional. Glad I chose me today." A heart emoji floated on the corner of the screen, comments already forming beneath. The pressure behind my eyes sharpened. I blinked it back. Then, just as the story closed, another message appeared, a DM from her. I tapped it open. Her words glared back at me. "If you try to demote me, I'll go public. Don't test me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. A coldness crawled across my skin, settling in my fingertips. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't hurt. This wasn't miscommunication. This was strategy. A slow, calculated erosion of my authority, of me. For a moment, my breath faltered. My lungs felt like they forgot how to expand. This wasn't just about work anymore. This was personal. A rewriting of the truth before I'd even spoken it. Another wave of whispers drifted from outside, the muffled sound of laughter, followed by a soft, pointed silence. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. This was the descent. Sharp edges, cold floors. Shifting alliances. Truth warping right in front of me. I opened my eyes, and then I heard footsteps approaching the back room. Firm, purposeful. Someone was coming to tell me something, and by the heaviness in each step, I knew it wasn't good. The footsteps stopped just outside the back room door. A faint hesitation, a small intake of breath, and then a soft knock, too gentle for the weight it carried. I lifted my head slowly. "Come in." Jasmine slipped inside, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She wasn't holding a product list or receipts or anything work-related. Her hands were empty, clasped together in front of her like someone bracing for impact. Her voice came out low. "They're talking again." The words sank into me with a dull, predictable ache. I didn't flinch this time. The hurt was there, yes, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was something else, something quieter, something steadier, like the slow thickening of ice before it hardens completely. "What are they saying?" I asked. She hesitated, staring at the floor. "That you don't care about mental health, that you're targeting Peggy, that you pushed her into a breakdown." A strange calm settled over me. Not detachment, more like clarity pressing through the fog. I'd felt this before, though it had been decades. A moment when the fear and the heartbreak and the exhaustion all lined up just right, leaving something crystalline and unmistakable in their wake. I took a breath and nodded. "Thank you for telling me." She bit her lip. "There's more." Carson said. She stopped, eyes flicking briefly to mine before dropping again. "He said he'd back her if anything happened." A soft pressure tightened around my chest, but it didn't break me. It didn't even bend me. Instead, it felt like confirmation, an answer to questions I hadn't wanted to admit I was asking. The pattern was changing. Lines were being drawn, not by me. "Okay," I murmured. A silence stretched between us. Not the cruel kind I had heard in the aisles, not the mocking kind that spread when people felt bold behind closed lips. This silence felt honest, heavy, but honest. Jasmine stepped forward slightly. "I just thought you should know. I appreciate you." She nodded once, relief flickering in her shoulders, and slipped out again. When the door closed, I let the quiet settle. It didn't choke anymore. It didn't cut. Instead, it cleared space inside me, pushing aside the panic, the confusion, the disbelief. Something older rose in its place, something that had carried me through years of scarcity and storms. A decision forming, not out of anger, not out of fear, out of necessity. My mother used to say, there's a moment in every hardship where the floor stops falling and you realize you're still standing, and whatever comes next will not be survived by accident. It must be survived on purpose. I stood now. My knees protested for a moment, but I ignored it. I walked to the small hand mirror mounted beside the supply cabinet. The cheap glass warped the edges of my reflection slightly, but the center was clear enough to see the shift in my face. Not rage, not despair. Resolve. I picked up my phone from the desk. Peggy's last message glared up at me. Don't test me. But I wasn't testing her. Something deeper was unfolding. I called her. She answered immediately, her voice sharp. "Are you ready to repeat yourself?" I didn't sit. I didn't soften. I gave her the line she was waiting for because I no longer feared how she might twist it. "You can return to your previous position with your previous pay," I said evenly, "or your employment ends today." A long breath hissed through her teeth. "So you really are doing this?" "I'm giving you a choice," I replied. What you do with it is up to you." "You're making a huge mistake," she said. "You don't know who's on my side." My pulse stayed steady. "I don't run this business by committee." "You won't be running it at all when I'm done," she snapped. "You think people don't see what you're really like? You think they'll side with you? You're out of touch. You're controlling. And you're terrified of losing power." Her words were meant to hit soft places, places that used to bruise easily, places that no longer did. "You didn't show up," I said. "That's the only truth here." "You're punishing me for being mentally ill," she shouted so loudly the sound distorted. "I hope you know how illegal that is. I hope you know what happens next." Her breathing grew uneven, angry, erratic. But mine didn't, because something had shifted inside me. Not a break, not a collapse, but a click, a realignment, a snap. "I'll expect your answer in writing," I said, and hung up before she could speak again. I set the phone down gently on the table, the metal surface cool beneath my fingertips. The decision was made. But as I reached for the door to return to the front of the shop, footsteps sounded again, faster this time, urgent. Jasmine burst in without knocking, her face pale. "You need to come out front," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something just happened, and you're not going to like it." The air around me shifted, heavier, darker. I didn't move. Not yet, because I knew, without being told, that whatever waited on the other side of that door would change everything. Jasmine's voice trembled in a way I had never heard from her, not even on the holiday weekend when the credit card system crashed and she single-handedly kept customers calm for an hour. This was different. This was fear wrapped in urgency, pressed thin enough that it frayed at the edges. My hand hovered over the doorframe for a moment before I finally stepped into the main shop. The noise hit me first, low murmurs, the shuffle of bodies, the uneasy shifting of customers who sensed something was off even if they didn't know what. The cold light from the front windows stretched across the floor in long rectangular bars, cutting the room into quiet pieces. And then I saw it, Peggy, standing in the center of the shop. She wore her manager lanyard, something she hadn't even worn regularly since the promotion, as if it served as a badge or a shield now. Her coat was half unzipped, hair pulled into a messy ponytail, face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with a kind of furious righteousness. And she wasn't alone. Carson stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight with an expression that felt like betrayal twice over, on his part and mine. Two younger employees hovered behind them, eyes darting to me and then quickly away, guilt rippling through their posture. Customers lingered nearby, pretending to browse while watching us with thinly veiled curiosity. The air had weight now, thick, almost metallic. I could taste the tension on my tongue. Peggy turned when she heard me approach. "There she is," she said loudly, her voice bright and brittle, finally willing to talk to her employees face to face. A customer in the corner glanced up sharply. Another froze with a product in hand. I didn't answer immediately. My breath settled into a slow, steady rhythm, the one I'd learned from surviving years of too tight budgets, too long days, and a marriage where silence could bruise as much as words. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. She smiled, a thin, triumphant line. "You hung up on me." I ended a conversation that had gone nowhere. "It went exactly where it needed to," she snapped. "Because now everyone knows what you're doing, and they're here to support me." I looked at the cluster of employees behind her. None spoke, none stepped away. They weren't united. They were afraid of choosing the wrong side. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. "This is not the place for this discussion," I said. "Customers are here." "They deserve to know," she said, lifting her chin. "They deserve to know what kind of environment they're walking into. A place where mental illness is treated like a failing instead of a disability." Several heads turned. A few customers stepped back, uncertain. The room was shifting under my feet. My heart thudded once, heavy, and then steadied. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to make a scene. Jasmine took a step toward me, but I lifted a hand slightly, signaling her to stay back. I didn't want her caught in this. I didn't want anyone caught in this. Peggy's eyes flashed. Go on, she said loudly. Tell everyone what you told me. Tell them you think mental health days are laziness. Tell them I'm unreliable. Tell them I deserve to be demoted or fired because I didn't have the spoons to call you. A wave of heat rolled through my chest, but I forced my breath into my lungs, slow and steady. The urge to defend myself burned, but something deeper held me still, an understanding that speaking now would feed the fire she had already lit. Instead, I said, "Step into the office. Now." She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "I'm not stepping anywhere. I'm done letting you control the narrative. I'm done being treated like I'm disposable." "You're not disposable," I said softly, "but you are responsible for your actions." That quiet line landed harder than anything I'd said all morning. Her face hardened, a flicker of something dangerous sparking behind her eyes. She pulled out her phone, and then she held it up, recording. My stomach dropped. "This," she announced, "is how my boss talks to someone struggling with mental health. This is how she treats her employees. Let's see how this looks outside these walls." Carson shifted uneasily behind her, but he didn't stop her. No one did. It was happening. The unraveling I'd felt coming, the slow, invisible threads pulling loose, was suddenly visible, tangible, recorded. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't collapse beneath the weight of her accusation. I simply breathed. "All right," I said quietly. "If you're recording, then record this. Leaving a store unopened without notifying anyone is negligence, not a mental health issue, and threatening your employer is grounds for termination." Her expression flickered, anger warping into disbelief, then outrage. "You just admitted it," she yelled. "You just said you're firing me because of my mental illness." "I said you abandoned your responsibilities," I replied. "You didn't call, you didn't text, and now you're trying to weaponize the situation to avoid consequences." A murmur rippled through the customers, some uncomfortable, some sympathetic, some confused, but Peggy saw only victory. She turned the camera toward herself, tears pooling instantly, too instantly. "See?" she whispered shakily, holding the phone close. "This is what we go through. This is how small business owners treat their staff." I closed my eyes for half a second, letting the sound of her voice wash over me, letting the humiliation, the disbelief, the surreal cruelty of it press into my skin until it found the last fragile spot inside me. And then something inside me shifted, not breaking, not snapping, settling, a new clarity, a cold, precise line drawn through the chaos. This wasn't about saving face. This was about survival, and survival required strategy. I opened my eyes. "Everyone go back to work," I said to my staff, my voice low but steady. "Now." The authority in my tone startled even me. Carson hesitated, eyes darting between us, but when Peggy didn't speak, when she didn't countermand me, didn't reassert control, he stepped away, slowly. The others followed. Peggy's phone trembled slightly in her hand. "You think this is over?" she whispered. "It hasn't even begun," I said. I turned and walked toward the office. Behind me, her breathing hitched, an audible break in her confidence. Jasmine followed me inside, closing the door behind us. Once we were alone, her voice dropped. "There's something you need to see," she said, pulling her phone from her pocket with shaking hands. "Peggy posted something 20 minutes ago, before she came here." She turned the screen toward me. A screenshot of our schedule, doctored, manipulated. The caption read, "Imagine being expected to open when you're not even scheduled." My breath stopped, completely, because the screenshot looked real, convincing, and the comments, dozens of them, were already forming a story that had nothing to do with truth. I stared at the image, the careful edits, the targeted narrative. She had planned this. She had thought it through. And she had done it before walking in here to record me. I felt the air in the room shift again. Denser, sharper. The edges of everything seemed to tighten. This wasn't a petty conflict. This was calculated sabotage, a campaign, a trap. I swallowed hard. I knew what I had to do. But as I reached for the chair, ready to sit and begin gathering what I needed, ready to start pulling every document and timestamp and message that would protect my livelihood, there was a sudden knock at the office door. Firm, heavy, not a customer, not an employee. Something in that knock carried authority, and when the door creaked open, the last person I expected to see stepped inside. The man who stepped into the office wasn't a customer, wasn't an employee, and wasn't someone who wandered in by mistake. His presence filled the doorway before he even spoke. A quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need volume to command a room. Officer Hammond, city enforcement, routine compliance inspections, occasional follow-ups on business complaints. I'd met him twice in the past 3 years, always polite, always precise. He remembered names, an unnerving talent in a town where people blended easily into one another. But seeing him now, today, made the floor beneath me tilt just slightly. "Afternoon," he said, nodding to me, then to Jasmine, then back again. "We received a call." Jasmine stiffened. My fingers tightened slowly around the edge of the chair. "What kind of call?" I asked, keeping my voice level. He opened a small folder in his hand, paper, not digital, and scanned a line before answering. Allegation of discriminatory employment practices, retaliation concerning mental health, hostile work environment. My heartbeat remained steady, too steady. A strange, cold steadiness that didn't feel like denial. It felt like bracing for a blow I'd already sensed coming. Peggy had escalated, and she'd done it fast. Hammond raised a hand slightly. "I'm here to gather information, not to make any determinations today." Jasmine shifted closer to me, almost unconsciously, as if the room itself had shrunk. "Is Peggy the one who called?" I asked. He didn't answer that. "Are you able to speak privately for a moment?" Which meant yes. I nodded. "Of course." He stepped aside slightly, enough that the doorway opened just wide enough for me to exit. But in that small gap, I could see the entire shop. Customers pretending not to stare, employees pretending not to listen. Peggy, standing near the counter, holding her phone low now, but not off. Her expression sharpened when she saw the officer outside the door, and in a single flicker of her eyes, I saw it. Satisfaction. She thought she'd already won. I stepped out, closing the door behind me, and Hammond guided me to the front of the store where customers gave us a wide berth. The lights buzzed faintly above, harsh and unflattering. Outside, the winter sun threw a long, cold beam across the windows. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. I didn't start with emotion. I didn't start with accusations. I didn't even start with what Peggy had done today. I started with the facts. "She was scheduled to open," I said. "She didn't show up. She didn't call. She didn't text. We discovered the store unopened 3 hours after the posted time. Customers were waiting. Employees were waiting. I had to rush down and open myself." He nodded, making a note. "When I finally reached her," I continued, "she told me she had taken a mental health day and didn't have, in her words, the spoons to notify anyone. I told her communication was required, especially in a managerial position." "And then?" "I gave her 2 options," I said steadily. "Return to her previous role or be terminated." He looked up at me. "Why a demotion instead of a warning?" "Because," I answered, "a manager who cannot be relied upon to open the shop cannot continue in that position, and because this was not the first time she'd disappeared during a shift." A silence settled between us, not judgmental, not defensive, just a pause to let the weight of my words settle. Then he asked the question I had expected. "Did you mention her mental health?" "No," I said. I mentioned reliability. She brought up mental health as a shield, not as a factor we discussed. He made a slow, deliberate note. I watched the pen glide across the page, steady and calm, the opposite of the turmoil swirling quietly behind me. "Now," he said finally, "I'm going to speak with her as well." He motioned subtly toward the front counter. Peggy stood straighter when she saw him coming, her entire body language shifting into something wounded, fragile, trembling at the edges. Her audience, Carson included, watched with the kind of rapt attention people give a show they've been waiting for. Hammond approached her. I stayed where I was. Her voice rose immediately, trembling in all the places it hadn't trembled an hour ago. "She's punishing me," she said, loud enough for customers to hear, "because I'm mentally ill, because I stood up for myself. She threatened my job because I needed a day to regulate." Customers glanced over. Carson stepped closer. The two younger employees leaned in as if afraid to miss a single word. I felt the heat gather beneath my ribs, not anger. Something colder, something older. A pressure that didn't shake, didn't burn. It clarified. Hammond raised a hand to quiet her. "I'm gathering information," he said gently. "I need you to speak one at a time." Peggy sniffed dramatically, wiped her cheek even though no tears were falling. She expects perfection. She doesn't understand mental illness. She said I abandoned the store. I didn't abandon anything. I wasn't scheduled to open. She faked the schedule when she realized she messed up. My head lifted sharply. Faked the schedule. She wasn't done. She wasn't even slowing down. "She yelled at me," Peggy continued, voice cracking. "She told me I should have ignored my mental state and shown up anyway. She said I should have pushed through, that I don't deserve my job if I can't be reliable." Her words. I felt so unsafe I had to come here with support. Support. As if Carson were a bodyguard, as if I were a danger, as if the truth itself had been rearranged, rewoven, repainted into something unrecognizable. Hammond listened without interrupting, but his pen paused once, just once, when Peggy said I faked the schedule. That pause was a crack of daylight. She kept talking. "Everyone knows she's old-fashioned," she said. "She punishes people who don't live like she does. I've been walking on eggshells for months. Today just pushed me over the edge." Carson nodded faintly. Jasmine, behind the counter, looked down at her register drawer, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. Peggy wasn't telling a story. She was building a case. "And," Peggy said, producing her phone like a magician pulling out a trick, "I recorded her threatening me. I have proof." Hammond's eyebrows lifted slightly. "May I hear it?" She nodded eagerly and hit play. A tinny version of my voice filled the shop. Soft, steady, calm. "You can return to your previous position with your previous pay or your employment ends today." Then silence. Then Peggy's voice on the recording, "So you really are doing this." Then my voice, "I'm giving you a choice. What you do with it is up to you." But what the recording didn't include, what she had cut out, was everything before it. The negligence, the absence, the threat, the manipulation, the lie about the schedule. Her phone didn't tell a story. It told a sliver of a story, the dangerous kind. Hammond listened without expression. When it ended, Peggy held the phone to her chest as if it were evidence of a wound. "See?" she whispered theatrically. "Do you see what she does?" A thin, sharp quiet settled over the shop. Even the customers seemed to sense it, the moment before a storm breaks. And then Hammond turned, not to Peggy, to me. "Do you have documentation of schedules and shifts for the last 2 weeks?" he asked. Peggy stiffened. Her face faltered. "Barely, but enough." "Yes," I said. "In the office." He nodded. "Let's take a look." As I stepped toward the office, Peggy lunged forward half a step, panic finally cracking through the performance. "She changed it," she said quickly. "She changed the schedule after I left. You can't trust anything she shows you." But Hammond didn't answer her. He followed me, and the shop fell into a tense, suspended hush. Inside the office, I took out the binder, the old one, the one I never digitized because paper couldn't be altered without leaving evidence. I opened it to the printed schedule. There it was. Peggy's name, Peggy's shift, Peggy's responsibility to open. Hammond looked it over carefully. Then he asked, "And the digital log?" I turned the monitor toward him, opened the employee scheduling system, navigated to the timestamp log. Every edit, every update, every user action was recorded. No changes since the schedule was posted 4 days ago. No alterations, no tampering, no lies on my part. But there was more. I opened the Messages tab, Staff Group Chat. Peggy, "I'll open tomorrow." Peggy, "Got it covered." Peggy, "See you all later." Hammond read each message quietly. Then he closed the folder in his hand with a soft thump. I felt my breath catch, not in fear, in awakening. He straightened, adjusting the collar of his jacket slightly, and said, "I'm going to need to speak to her again." But before he stepped out, he paused. "Do you have any documentation?" he asked carefully, "of previous no-calls or concerns?" I nodded and reached into the bottom drawer, pulling out the employee file I had dreaded touching for months. Small notes, missed midday returns, 2 unexplained leave-early incidents, 1 shift abandonment, all small enough that I had spoken to her privately instead of writing her up. Too kind in hindsight, too trusting, too hopeful. I handed him the file. He took it gently, respectfully, like it mattered, because it did. When he stepped out of the office, the quiet in the shop deepened, like every person inside sensed a shift before anyone spoke it aloud. Peggy lifted her chin, words ready on her tongue. Her phone raised slightly as if preparing to record again, but Hammond didn't give her the chance. He held up the paper schedule, the printed messages, the timestamp log, and said 8 words that froze the room cleanly, sharply. "Peggy, we need to discuss falsified information." Her entire expression collapsed. Carson inhaled sharply. One customer muttered, "Oh, damn." The 2 younger employees stepped back as if distance might protect them. Peggy's voice burst out, cracking under pressure. No, she doctored it after, Hammond raised a hand. "Let's speak privately." "No," she cried, stepping back. "She's lying. She's framing me." Her voice rose into panic, but it wasn't controlled anymore. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was unraveling, unmistakably, irreversibly. The truth hadn't spoken loudly. It had spoken plainly, and that was enough. As he guided her toward the door, her eyes met mine, wide, frantic, desperate for ground that no longer existed beneath her feet. "You're going to regret this," she whispered hoarsely. But for the first time all day, her words no longer pierced, because they no longer had anywhere to go. Behind her. Carson lowered his gaze to the floor, his posture folding inward in a quiet collapse of certainty. The door shut behind them, and the shop exhaled. So did I. But the moment of stillness didn't last. Jasmine stepped toward me, her voice low, urgent. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something you haven't seen yet." I turned to her slowly, and when she lifted her phone to show me what Peggy had posted in the last 60 seconds, my entire body went still, because the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Not even close. The image on Jasmine's phone was so still, so ordinary that for a moment my mind refused to understand what I was looking at. A picture of my storefront, taken minutes ago. The caption split into 2 cold lines. "If anything happens to me, this is why." Former employee exposing abuse at shop name, and beneath it, a storm already building. Shares multiplying, comments thick with heat and certainty from people who had never stepped foot in my store and never would. Heart emojis for her, fire emojis for the drama, accusations for me, my name, my real name tagged publicly. For a moment, the room blurred as if the air had shifted too quickly to breathe. I felt the floor beneath my shoes, solid and real, but everything inside me swayed like someone had tilted the world by a degree. Not anger, not fear, not even humiliation. Just an ache. A deep bone-level ache that felt older than today, older than this shop, older than any single moment I could name. The ache of being misunderstood in a way that rewrote who you were. The ache of watching years of effort stand suddenly, terrifyingly, undefended. I lowered the phone slowly. "Thank you," I said softly to Jasmine. My voice didn't shake. Strangely, nothing did anymore. I walked to the front window and looked outside. Winter light draped itself across the pavement, pale and thin. Cars rolled past. Life continued. The world did not tilt with my world. It never had. I had spent so many years believing that survival required noise, shouting back, defending myself, making others understand. But standing there now, watching sunlight settle on concrete like dust, I realized something I should have known all along. Strength is quieter than fear, and truth does not tremble, even when people refuse to look at it. Peggy's voice no longer echoed in my mind. Her accusations, her twisting of narratives, her threats, they floated somewhere far away, as if they belonged to a story I had once been caught inside but no longer believed in. Officer Hammond returned a few minutes later, his expression calm but firm. He approached me gently, as though walking through the fragile air between us. "I'll be filing an incident report," he said, "but based on what I've seen, you acted within policy. Documentation is in your favor, and the evidence she submitted was altered. You are not under investigation." Relief didn't wash over me. It arrived slowly like warm water spreading through chilled hands, quiet, steady, unforced. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "I recommend locking the shop's social accounts temporarily. Don't respond to anything online. Everything else will settle." Settle. Yes. Some things settle only after they break open. When he left, the store felt heavier but clearer. A place that had survived a storm without lying about whether it had been shaken. I walked to the back room again, alone this time. The air was dimmer, softer. The old light bulb flickered above me in a rhythm I had grown used to over the years, never bright, never steady, but always there. At the metal table, I sat down slowly and let my palms rest flat on the surface. Cool metal met warm skin. The contact grounded me. In that stillness, something inside me loosened, not weakness, but release. My mother's fabric scrap returned to me, the uneven stitches, the faded blue cotton, the clumsy knots I had sewn with small hands. A lesson sewn into memory. Effort mattered. Showing up mattered. Repair mattered more than perfection. For years, I had carried that lesson like a quiet oath. I had built my life around it, my work, my marriage, my escape from that marriage, this shop. And I realized now that somewhere along the way, I had confused repair with responsibility. Not everything broken in my life was mine to fix. Peggy had not been mine to fix. Her unraveling had begun long before today, long before me. All I had done was stop holding together a seam she had no intention of reinforcing. Outside the office, I heard the chime of the front door opening and closing, customers coming and going, life continuing, the world not tilting with mine. I let my eyes fall shut for a brief, gentle moment. When I opened them, the pressure in my chest had shifted from weight to clarity. I rose, walked to the small mirror by the cabinet, and saw a face lined with years, lined with working, surviving, rebuilding, but not defeated. There were shadows beneath my eyes, yes, but also something steadier, something that looked like truth surviving the distortion. I stepped back into the shop. The staff grew quiet. Carson avoided my gaze completely, the guilt on his face a kind that didn't need words. The two younger employees busied themselves with tasks they normally ignored. Jasmine gave me a small, soft nod. One I returned. "I'm closing early today," I said. They didn't argue. I locked the door once the last customer left. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the shop like the settling of dust after a collapse. Not an ending, just a pause before rebuilding. I stayed for a while after everyone left, wiping shelves that didn't need wiping, straightening displays already straight, letting the silence soften rather than suffocate. When I finally stepped outside, the air was crisp enough to sting my lungs. The sky above was washed pale with the last traces of late afternoon. My breath drifted upward in a thin cloud that disappeared almost instantly. As I walked to my car, I felt something shift inside me. Not a stitch pulled loose, a stitch retied, not a collapse, a clearing. Peggy's story might continue online for a while. People might argue, might assume, might project their own wounds into something they didn't fully understand. But truth, quiet, patient, unadorned, had a way of outlasting performance. I pulled the car door open and paused with my hand on the frame, letting the winter air settle around me like a familiar coat. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I wasn't even shaken anymore. I was simply free of something I had been holding together long past its expiration. And as I sat down, letting the seat warm beneath me, the fabric memory rose again, my mother's crooked stitches, my childish knots. For the first time, the fabric didn't remind me of imperfection. It reminded me of endurance, of trying, of continuing, even after the seams gave way. If that old scrap of fabric were in my hands right now, I think I'd see it differently. I think I'd trace the crooked lines and know that even the uneven work of my younger self had carried a kind of beauty I couldn't recognize then. A beauty not in flawlessness, but in effort. And maybe that's what this whole day was. A reminder that I can release what no longer holds. A reminder that I can choose clarity over chaos. A reminder that I can start again without collapsing. If my story stayed with you, tell me. Sometimes hearing another voice in the quiet helps us both remember we aren't alone in the rebuilding. And if you've endured something like this, something that shook you but didn't take you, I'd like to hear the part of your story that kept you standing. Your presence here means more than you know.